Hey everyone, how's it going? Five Finger Shuffle. We are back here with another video. Today what I want to do is talk to you guys about the Wyvern effect. So what is the Wyvern effect? As I'm sure many of you already know, but for those of you that don't, Wyvern underwent some enormous changes recently. There's four major things that have happened to the Wyvern boss as they've added a floor 11. The floor 11 has slightly different mechanics. The four things that are different are one, the boss will always attack the tank now, so there's no randomness as to who they're going to attack. Two, the boss always attacks three times, so you can't change that. And three, the amount of debuffs. The only thing that matters about the amount of debuffs is the amount of damage that's inflicted. So his damage will increase based on whether or not he has three or more debuffs. Sorry, two two or less debuffs, his damage will increase, three or more, and it'll be decreased. And finally, the fourth thing is that if you are not water, you will be dealing less damage to the boss, you'll be taking more damage from the boss, and finally, every time you hit the boss, you will increase his attack bar by 10%. So, all that being said, that has caused for some major shakeups in team compositions, and so what we're going to do today is we're going to present a list to you guys of 10 units who have been severely affected by this Wyvern effect, whether it be for good or for bad. And I just want to throw a quick disclaimer out there that just because a unit is on this list does not make them good or bad, does not make them OP or terrible. It just means they're affected the most by this change. So on a hypothetical tier list, Unit A will have moved the most from top to bottom or from bottom to top. It doesn't mean like just because somebody moved from say F rank up to C rank, that's a huge jump, but it doesn't mean they're the best in the game. So keep that in mind when you're judging the list. Not all these units are OP or terrible now, but they just have been affected the most. So let's jump right into the list. Starting off with a 4-star fire unit, of course, fire no longer having as much of an impact as it used to because it now buffs the boss and takes more damage and does less damage, is Cirilla. So Cirilla was a free-to-play unit that was a limited unit, and on the global server, we just had a chance to get her recently, and she was one of those units who people were like, okay, well, I don't have Soren, I don't have haste, let me use Cirilla because she's a free-to-play option. Well, that free to play option is now gone. She had this burn effect on her third skill. Not the greatest effect chance, but she was usable. You could make it work if you wanted to. Now, though, she can't do that anymore. There's no way you're going to be able to run her in Wyvern unless you have crazy OP gear. And at that point, I'm sure you have better. So she went from usable to basically unusable and takes a huge hit in terms of her functionality, as I don't really see her being used anywhere else in the game. So she comes in at number 10 on the list. At number 9 on the list, another Fire 4-star, who I'm sure people are going to be surprised to see him on this list, but Cherie. So Cherie is still great in many different places in the game. He's very, very good. That being said, he did take a big hit because he used to be the Wyvern boss. Like he was the number one cheat code for Wyvern 10, and he was the easiest way to clear Wyvern 10 because he did a lot of attack bar manipulation, and he also did he puts poison stacks on the boss, which was not only good to stop to kill the boss, but it was also good to keep the debuffs up on the boss as well to prevent him from taking extra turns. So he is still excellent in Arena. He's still going to be usable and very good in both Abyss and in Raids or Labyrinth. But he's does definitely going to take a hit, and he is going to move down the tier list just a little bit because he cannot be used. Well, I'm sure he could be used. I talked about this in my last video. He can still be used because he's probably one of the few fire 4-stars that can still be used there because his attack bar increase kind of counters out the increase of the boss, so they would kind of keep each other even. But I don't really know why you would do that. Like you're not really gaining much out of it, and not as much as you used to. So he takes a hit for sure, and he comes in at number 10, or sorry, number 9. Again, still in the fire category, this time a 5-star is Ball and Cezanne. So Ball is a big one. I actually almost moved him up this list even higher as to one of the greatest effective units because this was the main place people used him. I think he's great for Arena. I think he's underrated for Arena. Defense break, decreased speed, and heal block all in the same skill. Also, with another AoE attack on his second skill, I mean, he's really strong for Arena, but his main use having in the past been Wyvern, because all these things, well, the heal block isn't necessarily beneficial, but it's still a debuff. But defense break and decreased speed are enormous for Wyvern 10. Unfortunately for Wyvern 11, he's not going to be usable anymore. Even though these skills would be great, defense break is hugely useful. Speed break would still be hugely useful, but the debuffs aren't as important as they used to be. And being fire, he's just going to boost the boss and give the boss too many turns, and it's going to cost your team in the long run. So there's better options than ball, which means he takes a huge hit, drops way down the tier list, the hypothetical tier list, and so he comes in at number 8. Now, moving over to water for number 7 on the list is, I believe, our only our only 3-star on the list, and he's another one that could have very well been higher on the list, and it's the Terran Guard. So the Terran Guard was always really, really good. He was always really, really good for Wyvern as well, but he was never really used there before. I mean, he was used there before, but more of a free-to-play option. Everybody was like, nobody really wanted to build him. The reason being that, he's a free unit, he's a 3-star. Everyone likes building rare units. Now, though, people are being forced to build him because of his defense break. There aren't a lot of water units with defense breaks that are reliable. There's Kareen, who has a 3-turn cooldown on her 1-turn defense break. There's Clarissa, who has a 2-turn defense break on her skill 1, but it's only a 50% chance when skilled up. So it's actually only a 35% chance before you skill it up. And then there's this guy. There's also one more, but we'll get into him later in the video. So this guy starts at a 50% chance defense break, and it boosts up to 75% chance if you skill him up. He also has a chance at a dual attack and increases combat readiness of your allies as well. Um, so he is amazing now for Wyvern 11, and he is going to be a staple in almost every team for Wyvern 11, unless you have something else that can fill that role of the defense break. Like I said, you can use Clarissa, but technically he's going to be the better option. If you already have Clarissa built and you don't have him built, then probably use Clarissa. But just the fact that he went from you can use him up to almost mandatory for Wyvern 11 is going to boost him way up the tier list, despite the fact that he was already high. He's going to get a big boost just because of that. So coming in at number 6 is another water unit, but this is not good news for her, and that is Sigrid. So Sigrid is amazing as well. Another hard-hitting single target water unit with an ignore defense. She's still really strong for there, and I almost actually built her for my Wyvern team until I decided on somebody else who's on this list actually coming at number 4, but we'll get to that in a minute. Um, the reason that Sigrid was mainly used was she had a whole bunch of debuffs. So she had the bleed debuff, she had heal block, she had bleed debuffs on skill 1, and she had ignore defense on skill 3. All really strong things, but this bleed and the unhealable is now no longer all that useful. She was used before because you really needed those debuffs, so it was super important to have a hard-hitting damage dealer that did debuffs. Now without that, there's better options. There's things that are going to get hit harder, like say Kize, who might not necessarily hit harder by herself, but once you put the shield up, she just has more utility. Kize is going to break that shield down, which is usually where people get stuck, and that's where you're at risk of dying. So somebody like Kize would be a great replacement for Sigrid, as well as one other person who, like I mentioned, is coming up at number 4. Um, so Sigrid drops down the list a little bit as well. She's greatly affected by the Wyvern effect, and you'll see her in less Wyvern comps than you did before because of this change. All right, next up on the list, we're going to go back to fire. Still in the Nat 5 category is going to be haste. So haste was, now we're getting into the really drastically affected units. I run him on my Wyvern comp on my main account, and he's basically been de-geared now. You can still use him. He's still good. You can use him in Wyvern. He's got a heal with the second skill. Or sorry, not in Wyvern. You can use him in Raid. You can use him in Abyss if you're still doing Abyss. You could use him technically even as your farmer. I know a lot of people use him in Arena. Uh, he can hit relatively hard if you build him up on attack for Arena. So he's still very, very good. But his main use, his biggest thing is people were like, I want haste for my Wyvern team. And now you will never hear anybody say that again, as he's no longer a Wyvern unit. He can't be used there anymore. He can be used for 9 and 10 if you want to build comps for 9 and 10, but if you're building Wyvern comps, you may as well aim for 11. So there's no point building him for 9 and 10 when you should be aiming toward 11 either way. So he takes a huge, huge hit. Um, I'm actually quite sad about it because I put a lot of work into him, and I was actually just about to switch him to an even better set of gear, and now he's pretty much done with. So rest in peace, Haste. We will miss you. You won't see him all that often anymore, and I'm sure a lot of people that are using him in Arena are going to end up switching to something else because they were probably using him in both places. All right, so number 4 on the list, this is the unit I'm actually quite excited about. And I don't know if she's really caught on yet, but I feel like she's going to be potentially the go-to for Wyvern 11. Now, I could be wrong. I haven't really tested it out too much yet, but this girl, Chloe, suddenly becomes OP. So she went from not being good for Wyvern because she only had one debuff. She just has this magic nail. She doesn't do any other debuffs. She does do big damage, but well, she does have a stun, but she can't stun the boss, so that doesn't count. Um, but just with the magic nail, everybody was like, she got one debuff that yeah, it lasts for 3 turns, but like, who cares? It's just one debuff. It's not a defense break. It's not overly important. There's better options for there. Well, now that debuffs don't matter and it's all about damage, and she does extra damage, it's essentially like an attack buff. Um, I was playing around with her today, and when she has that up, you have to remember not only does she do extra damage, but your whole team does extra damage. So it's like an attack buff to your entire team. Somebody like uh, say I was running it with Angelica hits for whatever, like 500 damage. But the nail effect actually bumps it from 500 damage up to 2000 damage, and it's a huge difference. You're getting that huge bump in damage from every single unit, and you'd be really surprised how quickly it takes down the boss. Even though mine has bad gear, she was just ripping through the boss compared to normal. So if you have this girl and she's been sitting at level 5 untouched in your inventory, you may want to take a look into her. I'll once I get my Wyvern 11 team running smoothly, I will definitely do a highlight video on her because I think she's going to be the next big thing for Wyvern. Next up is going to be another water unit, and another one who's going to move up this list instead of down this list is Crozet. So Crozet, I don't even honestly know what he does. Decrease attack with his first skill, cast a barrier over an ally for 2 turns. So this one doesn't really help too much because it's over an ally. Attacks all enemies with Sword Storm, decreasing combat readiness, damage dealt, including the caster's defense. So honestly, he's just a tank, but he's a water tank, which means that you can put him in front. So he's by no means OP. This is one when I said at the beginning that units on this list weren't necessarily going to be like the top units in the game. They're not going to be like Chloe is now OP or Haste went from OP to kind of average. This guy is not OP at all, but he's a free to play unit. You can get him in the same place you get Lorena and all those other guys at the beginning of the game, one of those free to play units. You just have to do a couple tasks and you can get him for free. So if you don't have options for your tank in the front, I know a lot of people are running Angelica, but if you either don't have Angelica or you don't have the gear to make her tanky enough and you want to put a tank on that front line, there's only a few options. One of them is on this list, ahead of Crozet. Another one is Crow. So those are really the two main water tanks that are out there that you can put in Let's actually go back to this list here. So you've got, yeah, really you've got Angelica here at the bottom. You've got Crozet, and you've got Crow. And you've got Dion if you have Dion. But if you're, or I guess you could also use Zeno in a pinch if you're stuck. Um, but I mean, Crozet jumps way up this list. Crozet went from completely useless. You'd never use him anywhere really until now. He's like, huh, you know what? He's got an attack break on his first skill, and he's a tank that's water element. I mean, that's prototypical tank for Wyvern. He's everything you potentially need for there. All you have to do is build him tanky. He doesn't have to be fast. Just make him really, really tanky so he doesn't die. Put a healer in beside him, and you're good to go on your Wyvern team. I mean, Crozet, Angelica, Defense Breaker, say Terran Guard, and any water damage dealer, and you've got basically a free-to-play Wyvern team. I mean, although a lot of people are going to say Angelica isn't free to play, but you don't need to use him. You can use Aether. I've seen teams with Aether, Terran Guard. I forget who the damage dealer was. I think it was Jenna, but it was Aether, Terran Guard, Jenna, and Crozet, and it works just fine. So if you don't have any crazy water units, don't use the excuse you can't do Wyvern 10 because he just jumped way up the list and he's free to play. It went from, maybe he's only like a B rank or something on a tier list, but it does mean he's now usable in this position. So he comes in at number 3. Number 2 on the list, the last one to take a negative hit on this list, is going to be Soren. Poor Soren. One of my favorite art styles in the entire game. I love her character art. She looks awesome. Her animations are so cool. I'm not a big fan of Bleed personally, but it was amazing for Wyvern as she put so many stacks on the boss. If you've ever watched some of the other YouTubers that use her, it's ridiculous to watch how many stacks of Bleed she can put up on the boss. It's just non-stop, and it just makes Wyvern 10 so easy because you don't have to worry about the boss going twice ever. And she can do decent damage to keep up with it, and whatever damage she doesn't do, the bleed damage can take over at that point. So unfortunately, she's now fire element, so she can't help that way because she's going to help actually speed up the boss. She's also going to take more damage, and her debuffs don't really do anything anymore. So unfortunately, she drops way down off the list. Um, she is the second most affected unit by the Wyvern effect, basically dropping from really, really high rank Wyvern unit to obsolete. I don't see any reason really to use her anywhere in the game anymore. I'm sure you could force her to work, but I think the people that are still using her will probably end up taking her gear off and putting it on somebody else as they get the gold to do so or get other units and start building other units because I just don't see a place for her anymore. And the final unit, the number 1 unit on the list that moved the highest, is one of the units that I got a lot in my selective summons. And when I was doing my selective summons, I was like, oh my god, I will never build this guy. I pray that I never get this guy. And it's Tywin. So Tywin took a lot of hate from me specifically for a long, long, long time. And now they've changed Wyvern, and he is now one of the top units in the entire game for Wyvern 10. Sorry, 11. Wyvern 11. Let's take a look at his skills. 50% chance to dispel one buff. That doesn't really change anything. Damage dealt proportional to caster's max HP, so he'll do a little bit of damage, but no big deal, right? Second skill grants increased attack and crit chance to the caster and an ally for 2 turns and increases combat readiness by 30%. So, I mean, nobody really cares if he buffs his own attack and crit rate, but buffing the attack and crit rate of an ally means that if you're running, say, him, Angelica, and 2 damage dealers, he has a 66% chance to buff the attack of one of your 2 damage dealers, and it's a 2-turn attack buff, and it also bumps their combat readiness by 30% as well. So basically giving them a turn and buffing their attack and buffing their crit rate, um, which means you don't really have to run an attack buff on this team to do more damage. So he's supplementing your damage as he's tanking as well. Also, that combat readiness buff looks kind of underwhelming, but it's huge because it's going to increase your damage in the long run as well. Or if he happens to buff the combat readiness of your healer can heal him faster, which is also good. So no matter who he ends up buffing, it's beneficial. It won't go to waste. And then finally, what makes him amazing for here is his ultimate skill. Attacks all enemies after Sword Storm with 50% chance to decrease defense for 2 turns and increase defense of the caster for 3 turns. Damage dealt increases proportional to caster's max health. This can be reduced to a 4-turn cooldown. Um, Also, the effect chance can be increased from 50% to 75% chance defense break. So if you're going to run him as your secondary defense break or even as your primary defense break, you now suddenly have a relatively reliable defense breaker. But on top of that, he buffs his own defense for 3 turns, and that I'm sure gets overlooked. But that's what makes Crow so good in this slot is that he buffs his own defense, which basically makes him impossible to kill when you have a healer beside him. So this guy is not only going to do what Crow does in terms of buffing his own defense. Crow buffs the whole team, but the boss only attacks the lead unit. So really, you only care if he buffs himself, and he gives himself a 3-turn defense buff, and he defense breaks the enemy. That defense break of the enemy is like an added thing to Crow, which makes him way better than Crow in this position. Not as an overall unit, but in this position as a Wyvern tank, he is head and shoulders above Crow and anybody else in this slot. The only way that this could be better is if your Angelica is tanky enough to be able to survive in that lead spot and can still keep herself alive while you run triple damage dealers. So for speed comps, that might be what you end up doing. But even still, I think Tywin is just so reliable in that spot that if you have him, you're most definitely running him as your Wyvern tank. And you're going to have no problems with Wyvern whatsoever with him in that number 1 slot. So he is going to be the number 1 unit who is affected the greatest by the Wyvern effect. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I thought it was a cool idea to go through and kind of see who was affected the most. If you guys think I made any mistakes or if I missed anybody, please don't forget to comment in the comment section below. I love talking to you guys about it when we can. Don't forget also to like this video and subscribe to the channel as it does really help me out. I hope you guys are doing incredibly well and your Wyvern comps are coming along nicely. Have a wonderful evening and I will see you all next time. Bye guys.